Hi everyone, I'm Nick. I'm from Cheetah Digital. We're a multi-channel marketing software company. I'm the VP of Client Success for EMEA. I'm going to put my hands up and make a confession here because there's a hell of a lot of mobile gurus in the room here. Mobile to me is spending a lot of time on my phone and getting in trouble with my wife and kids for sitting on the sofa rather than helping out. So I am definitely no expert, but what I do know, and the angle I guess we're taking here today in terms of personal data, is from the marketing side of things. And the concept to talk about particularly today is zero-party data. I'm going to start with some research that we commission every year with e-consultancy, and we're in our third year of doing that. So we're kind of starting to see some trends emerging now. If we take a look at I guess, the more negative side of things, when we look at consumer attitudes towards data in particular, consumers, 70% of consumers have taken some privacy steps, which I guess is no surprise. So ad blockers or such like. 39% of consumers are turned off by cookie-based personalized ads, that tracking you around the internet, and as soon as you've browsed one thing, an ad pops up in a different place of something that you've taken a look at. But the good thing about the data and the research that we had was that there are some good bright spots. So 55% of consumers are willing to share data directly with the brand in exchange for some value. And there are 9 times more likely, consumers are more likely to want to participate in a loyalty program than not. And if we take a few look at the mobile side of things and the statistics from that perspective, we see an increase of 19% year on year on purchases from emails viewed on a mobile phone. And 52% of people use mobile in store to research or help make a purchase. And 52% also have purchased a product or service through an app. I guess no surprise to the room here. So the question is, viewing consumer attitudes as they are today, what part does zero-party data play, and why has it become so important for brands and for marketers at brands? Well, we don't have to really talk about the kind of new era of privacy that we're in. It's in our world today. Everything that we know in terms of everything to do with IDFA and Apple, which you'll all be completely clear on. I think this probably started maybe 4 or 5 years ago to really get into the zeitgeist. GDPR, of course, was a key catalyst in people starting to think about data in a different way. And I'm talking about consumers as well as brands. But we also had things like the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and of course, Apple made their first moves in blocking cookies, third-party cookies and tracking in their browser Safari. Now, let's be honest, Apple have taken a privacy stance here. Is that really for the consumer, or is it more as a kind of booyah to Google, whose whole business model is about data and monetization of data that they collect? Who knows? But the reality is, what that's done is that's built up this momentum with Firefox joining in and eventually Chrome doing the same, that's blocking access to these third-party cookies. So ultimately, what does that mean for a marketer? Well, most of the tried and tested ways to reach your consumer, to retarget to them, to personalize your marketing to them, are starting to either become impossible or less effective, or effectively something that they need to reconsider how they make their approach. So that's where zero-party data can come in and begin, I guess, as a way to combat some of these problems. I'm going to stop and take an analogy first, and forgive me because it's a little bit crass and a little bit cheesy, and Andy doesn't like it. But let's pretend that Andy's moved in around the corner from me, and I want to get to know him as a good neighbour. I mean, if you know Andy, that's probably mad, but let's pretend like I don't know Andy. So I go and I knock on his door and I say, "Hi, Andy. I'm your new neighbour. Would you like to come round to dinner at my house?" And the hope there is that we've made an introduction and we can begin a long-term relationship together, which is a good neighbourly relationship to have. So I say, "Why don't you come round to my house for dinner?" Now, what are my choices in terms of the way that I'm going to decide what I cook for Andy for dinner? Well, the first thing that I could do is I could go to his house on bin collection night and I could rifle through his rubbish and I could look at everything he bought in the past. What did you buy? It's effective. It's dirty work, but it's effective. I don't actually know if Andy ate the things that I've found the wrappers for. I can see what he discarded. So there's a way that from that I can infer what it is that I might be able to cook for Andy when he comes around for dinner. The second one is that I could get my pair of binoculars, and when he's having his dinner with his family, I could spy through the window and take a look at what he's eating in real time, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and from that, again, I could make some assumptions about what it is that I could cook for him. But what is the human thing that you would do? at that moment, I ask him for dinner, I say, Andy, are you a vegetarian? Have you got any allergies? And of course, he'd tell me, and then I'd make sure that I cook something that he wants to eat, at the very least, that's a pleasurable experience, or at the very, the very most, that I don't kill him by giving him something that he's allergic to as well. So let's think about that there, because what brands have been doing has been those other alternatives. Pretty grimy, pretty dirty, necessary for some massive scale it's given them as well. But is that a real connection with the consumer, and is that being built on trust? Well, what is zero-party data? I think, if I'd have spoken to you a while ago, you probably would never have heard of the term. It was actually something that Forrester, a senior analyst at Forrester, Fatima Katablu, came up with first. And she saw that this new privacy era landscape that we were in, and she could see that we needed to shine a light on a certain subset of first-party data. And look, that's what this is. It's still first-party data. But if you look on the table here, you'll notice that zero-party data can only ever be self-reported. And the reasoning behind that and the concept behind that is that if you're only ever self-reporting your data, this zero-party data, you're always there consciously providing it, you know you're giving it, and you're also giving it alongside consent, whether that's a marketing opt-in, whether that's a cookie permission, whatever else it might be. And therefore, you're starting to provide this data built on trust. And therefore, from that perspective, and the concept of the name zero is that no one party owns this data. No brand, when you give them your data, can go and sell that data on. The idea is at any point you should be able to come back to them and say, I gave you that data, and A, I want you to delete it completely, or B, I'm going to tell you something different about myself because it's no longer true. Now, how is it that brands will be trying to encourage people to give up this data? Well, we talk about the value exchange. So what might that be? Well, that might be as simple as a prize, winning a prize. Let's be as blatant as that. But it could be a personalized offer or a coupon or a product recommendation. It could be exclusive content. It could be loyalty points or anything else like that. So from that perspective, you can see that this benefit is there for the consumer to give that data. But there's also a benefit for the brand because they're able to, ideally sell more products as well. And so what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do today is look through just the customer life cycle here from acquisition through engagement into loyalty, just at different ways that brands we work with have been collecting zero-party data and some of the experiences that they've been using to deliver upon that. The one thing I'd say is that there is an additional benefit for creating these type of experiences and these moments of interaction with the consumer for a marketer. These experiences that collect this zero-party data also have the potential to drive engagement or awareness, or they have the potential to also directly drive people towards sales as well. So we'll see some examples. If we think about the first stage of the customer life cycle, unknown to known, well, here's a great example from Shell. This was actually Shell in Malaysia. And they had a particular competition, it was really, or a scratch and win, whereby if someone had spent 40 ringgits or more on their fuel, when they went into the grocery part of the retail part of the service station, they were then given a QR code to scan on their phone. And in that moment, the individual could scan the code, they could give up their data, their personal data. Of course, they can opt into ongoing marketing if they want to. They also could give up some zero-party data about their preferences of some of the products that they had, retail products they had, sandwiches and coffees, and you can see they were working with some brands that they were partnering for this data as well. And so in that moment, someone gave that data up, and then they had a moment to scratch away and instantly get something that they could redeem there in the store. So there was the value exchange for them to give up their data, unknown to known. There was zero-party data going with it, and what they had done at Shell was start to convert all those unknown people that were buying petrol into known digital individuals that they could start a relationship with. And of course, for Shell, that meant trying to drive them towards their loyalty programs that they had as well. So very mobile-centric way that you couldn't do, without mobile. You couldn't get that moment of somebody to capture that in the moment, give them some value straight away and capture their data, physical to digital. Of course, acquisition can be digital to digital as well. So everybody's on the social networks. And look, there's nothing wrong with still trying to reach an audience on a social network. It's incredibly a good way for an advertiser to find new people. But the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. And ultimately, what advertisers have been doing is constantly just paying to reach the same people over and over again. But instead, you have this opportunity to capture the moment of someone's attention and then try and gather some data for them with an opt-in and start a relationship with them. So here with Veet, this was through Instagram social stories. Someone was engaged, they swipe up. They then have a swipe, Tinder-style swipe poll to say if they're going, this is definitely not my demographic, date night with a bae or a girls' night out. And then after they completed that, they could give up their data and instantly get a discount promotion to Veet products delivered to their inbox. And then the additional value exchange was they get a personalized Spotify playlist based upon their answers at the end of this. So Veet now have this opportunity to have driven sales off the back of the discount codes. They have new people acquired into their list, and they have some initial segments of some data that can just be the lead-in for the next time that they communicate. Hey, how was your date night? How was the girls' night? And they can immediately begin that relationship and move forward from there. So that's what we want to talk about next. Once you start collecting that data, what would you do next with it? And it's at this point that I will say that I'm not here to be saying that zero-party data is the only type of data to collect, far from it. The key part here is bringing that data into the mix alongside the other data that you have as a brand. And therefore, this could be obviously the personally identifiable data, which is a given, the email address or phone number. But we're also talking about purchase history, browse history, and such like. And from that, you can start to infer and segment your audience as well. And this is the thing, like, people don't want to be creeped out by being followed by the internet, around by the internet, but what they do want is to have individualized and personalized experiences. So it's kind of a push-pull thing here. So therefore, utilizing the data that someone self-reported means you're not going to freak them out, and you're going to say, you told me this about yourself, so I'm going to market to you with this data. And of course, that also applies across different channels and touch points. So this is really important. And if I told you in one place this about myself, I want you to use this data to respect me or to give me value in another different channel along the way. One thing I would say is that some of this has been hard to do in the past because so much data has been pots and silos for a lot of brands. And what you think is a basic given of this single customer view has not been the case for many brands. And they've found it very, very hard as a marketer to activate their data. So let's look at an example here. On the face of it, again, a great sweepstake from Air New Zealand. They were flying to new destinations in the US, and they had a what makes you say yay to the USA. You take part in the quiz, you answer some questions. Simple, image-led, tap the screen to be able to give your choices up. So what food makes you say yay? Mountains, beaches, anything else like that. And at the end of it, you were given a personalized destination to the US as a result of where they were flying to in the US. Great, you could enter into a competition and you could enter into your marketing as well. And from there, what Air New Zealand did was when the competition had closed, they followed up with everybody and said, really sorry that you didn't win, but here is a discount code for the flight to the destination you got. You got LA, come and book a flight to LA and here's some money off your flight. And they tracked over $5.6 million worth of sales off the back of this campaign. So an immediate use case of that zero-party data providing value to the consumer and providing value to Air New Zealand. But importantly, they had 100,000 people because they got nice, clean data that relates to not just destinations in the US, but of course, if you got New York, then that might mean that you'd be interested in Tokyo as well. And therefore, in the marketing, for those that opted in, they could follow up and start to target you, and they can do it in a completely explicit way. They can be really clear that you got this, you got New York, and so I'm going to promote to you Tokyo because I think you'd love it. You told me you like mountains, so I'm going to tell you should go to Denver, for example. You don't have to be creepy about it. The brand can be completely open, and then they can say, if this isn't what you like, then tell us, and then people can change their data, and you can update that, and then you can continue to provide them better service. And on a similar tack here, if you think about style preferences with Aeropostale, they promoted this denim fit finder, and then they promoted that to their existing email list, and then they also had it on their I don't know what that weird red thing is. That definitely wasn't part of the design. So apologies. So they promoted that to their existing list, and so they had it on their website as well. And you go through the process of answering questions about your denim fit, who you're buying for, because Aeropostale actually had a lot of mums buying for their children. And at the end of it, the value for the individual for completing this was that they were given a personalized set of products in their in the e-commerce part of the website. So effectively, they were given a pre-filtered list based upon the answers that they'd given. But what Aeropostale did next, and this is the concept where so many retail brands in particular have got so much data that they don't know what to do with it, and therefore they're spending ages crunching that data, and the thing that they're personalizing most is like an abandoned basket or something like that. But actually, the zero-party data is nice and clean, segmentable, if you will, or personalized, easy to personalize from. And therefore, they, on the next follow-up email that they sent to those individuals on the list, they just changed the subject line that based upon someone's fit preference that they were given at the end. And what they saw was a 267% click-through rate and a 34% increase in their open rate versus the people who didn't have a personalized email. So really fundamentally different things because you naturally react to something that's about yourself and that's personal. And if we move across the customer lifecycle, well, I think we've all been in loyalty programs where we've racked up a ton of points and never ever used them. And loyalty is definitely moving forward, and personal data is playing a key part of that. People don't want points anymore necessarily, or they don't want that to be the sole purpose of loyalty. They also want to feel part of a community, and they actively won't deal with a brand who potentially don't sit with their own values in terms of political or environmental views in particular. And therefore, bringing someone in who's someone who might be already buying from you and making them more of an advocate and making them more of a loyal customer to you is incredibly powerful. And of course, zero-party data can continue to play a part in that. We call this emotional loyalty, and Vans deliver a really, really good example of that in their loyalty program, the Vans family. And I think the thing to point out here is that the predicament that the Vans have is that you don't buy trainers that often. Therefore, they need to keep you engaged in between. There's not enough purchases to just rack up points constantly. So they had to rethink this. They had to make it about what else can we offer to people to feel part of the community, if you will. And so therefore, they had quizzes and they had progressive data profiling. They offered people kind of money can't buy experiences with people from the skate community. And they did things like they encouraged people to upload the stories of them purchasing the story of their first pair of Vans. And actually, they were blown away by the stories and the feeling that people had for their brand and the stories that came about. And of course, those people aren't just sharing them just with the brand. They're sharing them in an open forum that can be redisplayed, and everybody else can see the love that others have for the Vans brand as well, which creates this family and this community. And look, this isn't just fluffiness for fun. You can see that nearly 50% of the North American D2C revenue came from these loyalty members, and they see significantly higher spend from loyalty members than non-loyalty members. So, you know, it has to pay for both the individual and the consumer and for the brand as well. When you wrap this up, we're kind of calling this overall concept of bringing together of data and using the value exchange and using data built on trust as relationship marketing. So getting to know your customers, using the value exchange as the reasoning behind why you're engaging with the consumer, using real-time engagement and show them that you've got the data and that you're using it to benefit them and to their advantage. And then, of course, bringing together loyalty and marketing as well. And look, the one thing I didn't say with loyalty in particular is you don't have to have it inside a program. The nature of having this quality of data means that at any one time, I don't know, if you've made 5 purchases in the last 5 months, you could get a surprise and delight email saying, spin the wheel, come and get an extra discount and tell us a bit more about yourself because you've bought from us 5 times. That doesn't have to be in an active program and everything that goes with it there. So it's about building the zero and first party data strategy, building that into the data strategy and aligning that. Leveraging the data and making use of that and finding the way to use that alongside the other data that you have, but importantly, take those opportunities to show someone that the data that they gave is being used to their benefit. And be always on, that's the other thing. Like, this never ends. Third-party data sets that have been used in the past, they're stale. Like, ultimately, they are a moment in time, a snapshot. But zero-party data, you have this option to continually ask someone, is this still true? Is this your preference? Family situation, a perfect example of how that changes over time. And therefore, you continually don't just ask new things, you reinforce, is this still true about you? And because you've done it as a brand based upon trust and that openness openness about the collection of that data, you've earned the right to be able to, as explicitly as that, say, you told me this, is it still true? And that's a lovely way for a brand to make that connection with a customer as well. Now, if we home in, obviously we've touched on a mobile aspect to all of these as well, but if we home in on those, obviously mobile offers the opportunity to be where eyes, ears and thumbs are. Like as with the Shell example, there's no way that can happen without having a mobile device in your hand to immediately get the reward. Using things like scratch and wins and spin wheels and nice image-led taps or swipe polls to make an engaging experience that removes the friction of giving up this data, and it's nice and clean as well. Obviously, mobile has an opportunity to have data sets that are really interesting and important, so leveraging that data alongside the zero-party data to offer value. So in a moment of geolocation, knowing somewhere someone is in a location and then therefore predicting or providing them with a valuable coupon or offer in that moment based upon their preferences that they told you about what they, let's say, like to eat and drink, but also their location aligned with that at the same time. And therefore utilising mobile, whether that's, say, SMS or push, to be relevant in real time as well and supplementing that information. If you know who someone's favourite team is at half time in that score, send them a notification, an SMS or a push that's going to cut through to say, come and place a bet with us because your team is they're up at half time, for example, as well. So there's many different ways to utilise this across mobile as well. So thanks very much. If you are interested in any of the Consumer Trends Index, obviously there's a value exchange there. So if you do want to download that, we're going to ask for your email address. And you can opt out of being spammed from us after that. But I hope that was something a bit different and the marketing take, I guess, on personal data. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nick. So we've got a few more minutes for questions. One that occurred to me is you gave the example of Vans there, and I can see how Vans is kind of like it's a sexy, youthful brand, and there's plenty of customers of Vans who'd be more than happy to engage with it. What if you're like a floor cleaner, or I don't know, a spot cream or something like that? How do you, does that make it that much more difficult to collect zero-party data?
Well, it's interesting because actually we work with GSK, so they're going through this process with us at the moment. And so we have a gum health quiz, for example, where you have to say about whether you spit blood when you're brushing your teeth and things like that. So it doesn't have to just be about my first Vans and the story there. It can be something that's useful and relative to the brand. So they, for example, are really interested to find out about what allergies someone has in terms of the pyrotin, and therefore they want to know whether it's pets or whether it's pollen that is the thing that triggers your allergies, for example. And that's all zero-party data, and that's all useful to them and useful to the individual to be marketed based upon that data as well.
Does there always have to be an incentive? Because I'm thinking that in the past, there have been lots of companies, I know it's a different business model, but lots of companies that have tried to pay people to watch adverts. And one of the problems with it is that you only get a certain kind of customer who's willing to do it, and the more valuable affluent customers can't be bothered. So is there a similar dynamic here, or is it just that you make it that much more relevant to their personal life that they're not thinking about the rewards?
Yeah, I think there's a part of which at the beginning of the top of the funnel, you might do something that's a little bit broad in terms of the incentive to get people in. And of those who are more interested in your brand, they're more likely to opt in. And then you do what we call the progressive profiling aspect. You begin a relationship with them and you get to know them better. And bit by bit, those people will drop off. But then from that perspective, what you do have is a core of consumer profiles of people who truly are interested in your products. And actually what you can do from a media perspective is then take those data sets of people that they've self-reported about themselves and interest in your brand, and you can do things like buy lookalike audiences to reach similar people across the ad networks as well. So that's definitely the way to do it. But we always say, yes, you can go and if you're a sock company, if you give away an iPad, people just want the iPad. Are they interested in your brand? So the more that you can make the value exchange related to your brand, the more likely you are to get people who are the right type of people as well.
And how do you communicate that data collection element? Because someone might share their preferences for holiday destinations or whatever, but they might not necessarily be happy about you storing that and sharing it. So how do you reassure people how you're going to use that information?
Yeah, so everything would be carried through any cookie policies or any opt-ins or privacy terms and notices that are explicit. And we always say be as explicit as you can to a brand and make it really clear what's the value for someone to opt into those. So some of the FMCG companies we work with, the value of, receiving an email about chocolate bars is not quite the same as the whole group of brands that might be there from an FMCG perspective. So actually, they've got concept of universal consent now, so that they have an option to identify you and therefore promote through marketing different products that they have in their portfolio or across different categories as well.
Right. Any questions from the floor for Nick?
I might start with the questions we have online while you...
Good.
Okay. 2 quick questions. So thanks everybody online. Keep on sending them over in the chat and the Q&A. The first question from Stephanie. Apologies. So if zero data is sourced directly from the companies, AI/predictive data, is that -1 conceptually?
Well, this is the thing. When you start to take in any data sets and then you start to use ML or AI to then crunch that data, all of that adds into the mix of the various data. So zero-party data should be part of the consumer profiles that you create, that you then run your models on, that then allow you to do more predictive things along the way. So ultimately, there's no right or wrong answer or one over the other or anything else like that. I think it's the two working in harmony. And so a lot of brands we're working with now, they're taking the swathes of data that they have across purchase history or browsing data, they're supplementing in other data that they have as they build up their profiles, and they're running models on that. I'm sure Andy's mentioned our work with Salling Group in the past, and they do huge volumes of data crunching around products that people buy to give them recommended personalized offers and promotions. Well, the next step that they're doing is bringing in preferences around taste through zero-party data collection to add into the model to then start predicting what people might like beyond what it is that they're buying today, so that they can get them across to other brands like homewares from maybe just groceries that they've got as well.
So Ray Hockley from Hitachi, but this is actually a personal question, nothing to do with Hitachi. You kind of almost answered my question at the end there, but have you ever considered what I call the house in the sun wildcard option, where instead of presenting a consumer of options based on what their preferences have either been described to you as or their previous history, but also offer a wildcard option that just says, I'm going to forget about all of that, and I'm just going to give you a wildcard option and just say, are you interested in that? Do you have any sort of facility like that?
That's an interesting one. That is the art of really good personalization models. Should be about adding in those slightly, one step removed, because nobody sits into a perfect box. Those one step removed suggestions that once you crunch big data, you start to spot that there are these little links out to different things, like somebody has a propensity towards this, and actually you wouldn't join the dots, and nor would they necessarily self-report that they were into something here, but actually you could go and find a connection over there. So yeah, it's something that I think is being considered and is a key part of a good personalization strategy. So it's not so much on the zero-party data bit, but absolutely you could do that and ask someone to self-report, is this of interest? In some of the loyalty companies we work with, a company called Reach over in the US, who are running a kind of effectively like an affiliate loyalty program with lots of brands, and you bring in and you get value by the data that you give ultimately, and therefore that data is then better served to you via the brand. So whether that's across different brands or within the brand that you're particularly buying from at that time, and they just have tons of these kind of swipe polls that they do to just get preferences, quite quick ones, and I believe in that they mix in some ones that might not align necessarily in order to try and start testing that. So yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've run out of time now, so thank you for that introduction to zero-party data. Fascinating stuff, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you all.
So we have heard quite a few references this morning to various regulation, and our next session is going to be looking more closely at regulatory affairs. So I'm going to invite two gentlemen on stage with me. Please take your seats. So these two guys are Serafino Nicoletti. He's Yes, Serafino Abate. He's the head of regulatory affairs at Volvo, and Stefano Nicoletti, who's the principal of, I should say Stefano. Someone told me earlier it's Stefano. Stefano Nicoletti, who's principal of regulatory affairs at BT. So thank you, Andrew. I forgot already. The title of this session is Times Are Changing, What's Next for Digital Regulatory Affairs? Now, what's great about this is that we've got guys who are both experts on regulation, but looking at it from slightly different perspectives. So I'm going to start with Serafino. You're at Volvo, and obviously data is no longer just generated by people, it's generated by things. And so maybe you could give us a little talk on how data regulation impacts Volvo and what the current regulation is like and where you might see it going in the future.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you to Dario, where is he gone now, and the team at MEF for the invitation. Yes. It's really nice to be here. It's my first conference post-COVID, and it's nice to sit and listen to business people talking about ideas and innovation. So I'm really pleased to be here. I started with Volvo Cars a month ago. I work in regulatory affairs in the R&D department, focusing on the connected car cloud. And this is a job that, when I was looking at the title of this panel, it made me reflect on, I spent about 15 years working on public affairs and regulation for telecom markets. And now I'm in a new job where the challenge is somehow reflect how regulation is changing. You mentioned the data, and I think is a good example of the things that, if we compare the old world of regulation we had in terms of goals, clear, well-defined goals, and a narrow focus on specific aspects, for example, infrastructure, but there was a lot of emphasis on promoting competition for the benefit of the consumer. Today, a lot of new regulation, which regards issues, data access, software updates, cloud, others that are coming, and they affect products such as the Volvo connected cars. What I find is that you start usually from a less well-defined problem. The problem stated up front is not as clear as the old regulation, and partially because a lot of these new rules are looking at things that might happen in the future that might signal the market is not working. So we are trying to fix things that not necessarily have gone wrong yet. But that makes the regulation itself, the scope of it, more difficult, more broader, and that opens clearly to a lot more leeway for interpretation. My new job is basically to tell people in R&D the next 5 years of model, for each model, given the feature that they want to put, what are the regulatory requirements. Now, if I was dealing with telecom, I could come up with a list of licenses, and pretty much that would already cover most of what I needed. Now, when we are talking about the connected car cloud, I need to understand personal data. I'll park it because I'm not a privacy lawyer and it's a word in itself, but only to start thinking non-personal data, it's a huge challenge. How do you access, do you continue to provide a safe and secure product while having an open access regime in effect? You can see that we have unclear, therefore, when the rules are laid out, what's the implication are for the concrete use cases. All these new rules are coming into force, they are horizontal, they apply to everything, but when I look at it, for example, the Data Act in Europe mentioned vehicles, others don't necessarily. But if you are in a kind of like specific vertical working on a product, you struggle to see what that means for you in terms of regulatory requirements. And third, what I see also is that in the past, we had rules, we had regulators that were assigned to implement them. Today, again, is becoming fuzzier. In the case of data, non-personal data, AI, there isn't a natural regulator. A lot of the legislation that I've seen in the making does not nail the point of governance up front, which I think is a big mistake, because who do we complain to? Who tells us what is compliance and what is not compliance? So we are getting now in a situation where there is a lot more interpretation to be done. In some cases, all these rules are thought, because they are thought horizontally, nobody has kind of like taken, all right, if I am providing this type, connected car products, how do I build a regulatory compliance framework that ensures that the product is digitally enabled and is compliant from the regional, local, or global perspective? So I think I've seen a lot of more of these difficulties coming into play, and that means we need really to become more interpreted of regulation. It reminds me of the word of the oracle in the old ancient times when, you kind of like, what does it mean? And you kind of provide an explanation to the software engineers, and they kind of like go, all right. But, and then you start a dialogue. But this is a very different game than it was in the past from a regulatory affairs perspective. And this has a direct and immediate impact on innovation. If we cannot work out how compliance looks like, you're going to have, in some cases, products that are digitally enabled, but the feature are switched off because locally you don't know what are the requirements. You don't want to go into non-compliance. Non-compliance is not an issue for a car maker because not requires recalling cars. And there is a disaster commercially, but also, you don't want to do that. So you work to be compliant. But, this is the challenge that we're facing now.
So very briefly, what are the regulatory rules around connected cars at the moment? Because obviously, regulation is in place to protect consumers. And so that's why cars don't blow up, or if they shouldn't. But if you're shipping a car now that is sending data out, what are the current regulations in Europe, for example, that you would have to abide by?
The grayer area at the moment, so GDPR we all know, talked about, we digested it, but what GDPR doesn't do is telling me it doesn't contextualize the definition of personal data when it comes to specific application. So where do I draw the line within the car? There is a lot of different layers of data that are generated for different purposes. Some is not even accessible to the car maker, it just goes inside the system. Some of this data is code, which is covered by IP, intellectual property. So suddenly you are in a very complex nexus where you might have some personal data, some non-personal data, some bits of code that are part of IP. How does an open access work in that situation when you have a product which is performing, when it's on, is performing a mission critical product? Safety and security, it's the first thing. So how do you square all these different,
Okay, so Stefano, turning to you. So you're with BT. If you press it, it should go green. Has it gone green?
Flashing green, yeah.
Good. So what's your view? What kind of digital regulation do you have to abide by at the moment, and where do you see it going in the future?
First of all, a quick introduction. I work in the group regulatory affair in BT. BT is the largest telecommunication providers here in the UK, for those of you who come from abroad. We connect beyond and above 30 million people in the UK every day, every time. We operate both as a fixed and a mobile network under the brand of EE, the latter. In fact, we are just about to undergo a rebranding where everything everywhere, the brand EE, will also be used for fixed connectivity. This is testament of the role and the importance of mobile. This has just been announced. We are a company that is investing heavily in network. We have a mission to roll out 25 million homes connecting through fiber by 2025. We have probably the best 5G network already, and we are aiming at covering the entire UK by 2028. As of today, we have the widest penetration and coverage, around 50%. So to your point about digital, we are clearly undergoing a transformation to become a digital company, and that's a challenge, how we stay relevant in 10 years down the line. With this very much, let's say, soul, which is very much around connectivity. The digital rules that we are following most in terms of the developments are developing in the UK and as much as the rest of Europe. What we have observed then is of today the news that during the Queen's speech, the legislation for the digital market units has been ditched and postponed to next year. The digital market units is effectively a competition market authority regulator that operates now under the powers of CMA, but would have had legal power to investigate in the behavior of digital and large tech firms, and it's not going to happen this year. It's a bit of a disappointment from a consumer perspective, we believe, but also for companies like us. We really hope that the development of this will be going in the direction when Ofcom, at least, which is very much closer to our business, will work closely with the Competition and Market Authority. And in terms of the interactions of digitals and network, particularly, this idea that traditional problems will go away and there will be a refocusing more on consumer regulation is something that I would like to challenge. To me, for example, the cloud market is very much a consolidated market, a market where there are only 3-4 large players globally. And public cloud are going to be very important for a sector like ours, particularly in the coming years when you will see more of what's called software-defined network or network virtualization. Effectively, for the non-expert, the core aspects of the network will move on to servers that will be, normal servers, but effectively core activities of the network will be run on software. And this will be a substantial saving for us. But how do you guarantee that once you are in the hotel, as a colleague of mine defines this as a sort of Hotel California problem. So, you can stay as much as you want, but you cannot ever leave because there is a sort of lock-up effect. And probably there will be market dynamics that will prevent us to operate effectively and to capitalize on those savings. But another example is that the large tech firms also operate as MVNOs. They operate in the field of electronic SIM, eSIM, and also in other areas that are very close to mobile. How do we guarantee that when they operate in these fields, they don't leverage their strategic market status, their power in the market to the advantage of closer market, for example, in the mobile services? How do we defend from this? So these are our new real competitors as much as being partners from us. And finally, and probably most importantly and most imminently, the aspect of traffic management. Now, speaking of 5G network particularly, or in general mobile network, traffic has grown and is growing at an unprecedented rate. Ofcom estimates that by 2030, traffic in the UK will grow by between 21 and 52 times. cost and price per gigabyte at the end user has dropped drastically. In 2015, 1 gigabyte was around £17. Nowadays, roughly £2. And this means it's dropped like as much as 80%. So the reality is that this business model is no longer going to be viable. And we are going to have we need the ability to manage traffic on the network so that those who create congestion effectively either pay for it or contribute to this step investment that we need to make for things to work. Particularly under COVID, we have seen moments where either football matches were broadcasted through Amazon Prime networks, or when game downloads, such as Fortnite, went on, the network was completely overloaded, reaching the records of several hundred terabytes at some point. And clearly, this isn't going to longer be sustainable. So what we are working on, and what we think it's important that the regulator should be working on, is to review the concept of net neutrality, which probably now is the wrong term. It's about the ability of manage the traffic on a network that is no longer fit for purpose for what was designed at the beginning. So the ability for us to introduce differentiated pricing for when you decide to run that download on Fortnite, and I'm talking about the companies. And when you've got 5-6 companies that generate 80% of that traffic, then how do you introduce in the system a mechanism whereby they can contribute to the network as well? Because clearly it's going to be important for the benefit of end user. And it's proved, there are studies already out there that justify that such an investment would not only be beneficial for the industry and for the wider sector, but for wider society. There will be increasing economic benefits. It's only of a week ago, the ETNO, which is the association that represents most mobile operators, quantifies a benefit in the areas of 52 billions for the entire economy in Europe, with fronting an investment of 20 billion. So that's the sort of challenge that we see and we face in this space.
Well, that's talking about content companies contributing to network costs is a very old issue. If I can take you back to the, you talked about network virtualization, and for those who don't know, the ability to slice up your network and then
Yeah, that's the slicing more. Network virtualization is about effectively moving the network functions from from vendors' kit, usually very expensive and need to be located in various points of the network, onto more generic servers. Most of the functions are run by software, and therefore you can reduce costs for the amount of kits you have to maintain, and for in general because software is easier to upgrade, etc.
And so specifically, what new issues do regulators have to deal with as a result of that change towards network virtualization? Yes.
From my perspective, as I said, the fundamental problem is that network virtualization happens in a context of a cloud. So we are lucky enough to have our own cloud here in the UK, but most importantly, for other operators in general, there will be the need to effectively have part of their functions, core to their business, run on cloud networks owned by one of these 4 or 5 cloud providers that dominate the market. Once you're in, and you have got to do a huge amount of spending in terms of customization of these networks. So once you're in, and maybe you do that for very good reasons, analysts this year at the Mobile World Congress were talking about up to 30% of OpEx savings in implementing this sort of strategy. Once you're in, you have got key functions of your network run on top of someone else's platforms. How do you and you've spent a huge amount in customizing those services. What happens if all of a sudden prices go up? How can you control that? You are locked in. So again, I guess the point for me would be having to look from a regulatory perspective at the let's say, dimensions of that market and the needs for this market to be ensuring a competitive outcome.
Right. So as Volvo looked into the, private network slicing area and private networking area, I know some car companies have done that.
So Volvo has got sort of like dedicated cloud, the Volvo Car Cloud, which is hosted by a third-party provider. And then we partner in different regions with different telecom operators for the provision of connectivity. So since 2013, when the first sort of like Volvo connected cars came out, the Tosland, the main production site in Gothenburg, it's about 6 million connected enabled car around the world that Volvo has produced. All of them require, you have an ongoing connectivity contract, and now you are building on, how that works with your cloud, but you also have all these different connection technologies. There is this V2X, which is the ability to vehicle to connect with, street furniture, other cars. This is the next frontier to be able to have a sort of like really impact on traffic manageability. And these solutions are now being discussed. What's best, is a mix of Wi-Fi simulation, network in the other, analyzing the criticality of the different sort of like situation, to understand what infrastructure would provide the best solution. But it's fundamental to the business now. I mean, no connected car, there's no car in 10 years' time.
And Volvo, you're shipping cars all over the world, and there's different regulatory environments all over the world. Some probably don't have any regulation, and others have very tight regulations. So how do you manage that complexity?
This is the trick, because I think while, when you sell a product is available in more than 100 countries, but obviously you don't produce in 100 countries. You have I think less than 10 big production sites around the world. This is for, the assembly of the final product, and then you have, people that brings in bits and pieces. What you do, this is the challenge is vary by region. So Europe, with all these, pros and cons, what we kind of seem to have managed, at least the understanding that, as a common market, we need common rules. The UK aligns, if not providing you usually, greater protection. So there is a big boost because you have, the biggest economic market where you can follow one set of rules. For other geographies, the US tend to have more specific rules, but to be honest, more on the sort of like traditional car bits, the tires, the bits, than the digital stuff. And then you have, if I look at other regions, where we are present, there's obviously China, where it's produced locally to local standards. And then you have production in, I think it's South Korea, another side that produces for the Asia Pacific. And you tend to sort of like you usually adopt as a first point, as a base minimum, you look what is available in the region, what standard or regulation. You see whether there is a common denominator that you can adopt. Sometimes, in some regions, if you come from complying, regulation in one country is recognized through mutual agreements with other country. And then there are global fora. One is called OICA, which is Global Association of Car Maker. As an ongoing dialogue, there is a UN body, UNECE, which has responsibility for making rules worldwide for automotive. Right. So there is some sort of like global level that you can rely on. But I'm telling you, I have a list of 350 regulatory requirements globally that I need to manage.
350?
Yeah, it's me and another guy. And we just arrived, the job wasn't done systematically. I'm the first, and we are the first two people that come in to do regulatory affairs, digital.
Wow. So. Any questions from the audience or from online? Dario?
Caught me by off guard. So great to hear about the different problems the companies have got. Here we got some companies like Volvo that has to use the right regulatory framework. BT has got too much data. which is the other side of a coin. But just to make it more complicated, here is another question from Mabel Mabel Cueto from Spain, which is, well, compliance always around human rights, respect, and fiscal security. What about HR? Must be around HR. So there's questions about, throwing to you, about data, about how human rights, respect, physical security, apologies, I've read, and HR. Are you impacted by any of these?
So I think there are very strict rules in the automobile sector about safety and security, and I think Volvo's DNA is in safety. I mean, Volvo started because the other cars could not live on the Nordic roads safely, so they produced something that could take all the bumpy roads and the minus 20 degrees and whatsoever. So I think it's very, very taken very seriously by the whole industry. So nobody is even thinking of compromising that goal with whatever comes now. I mean, that is paramount. And I think, in compliance with that, you always do in a way that you reflect, the best practice. I mean, if you want to be a sort of trusted partner, as you move more and more, the car, once you bought the car, and then it's yours, and you fix it, or you take it to fix it, it's your problem, whatever. Now is a relationship-based service. And then you need trust, and that's why I think putting, the ethics, the right ethics in terms of the personal data and the person and the safety and security is really the first building block.
That makes sense. We were talking about personal data versus car data as well. So here we go. The answer is you still have to comply with the overall physical person. In the end, has got a relationship. That's what you used. I'm jumping into your role, but I'm seeing that they're pointing at me, but I should point at you. There are some questions over there.
Yeah, so I've got a question for you. So John Ellis wrote a book in 2017 called The $0 Car, and he proposed that on average the connected car would produce about $40,000 worth of data, to which I bought the car, I drove the car, I maintained the car, I produced that data, but yet I'm not getting a check from the car companies for 40 grand. So how do we manage that value exchange? And one argument I've heard is, well, in the case of like Tesla, I give you the data and I'm getting constant updates to the car. It's innovating, that works out well. But then there's models like what Rover's doing, where they're actually selling the camera data to the local cities to then help the cities prioritize the fixing of potholes. So there actually is an economic model there, and to what end will individuals be able to participate in that exchange?
I'll start from them.
Having worked in the sector, tangentially before, what I can say is that probably out of those $40,000, most of them would be probably untapped somewhere in a business or in a number of businesses which for some reason haven't taken off. And you mentioned the potholes, but I could think about vehicle to X, vehicle to infrastructure, think about marketing and more efficient management of the traffic, congestions, running more efficiently, for example, including the vehicle as a service. So where you share your car with some others, and you actually reduce congestion and reduce the need for urban infrastructure, which is designed around the cars. Let's not forget that our cars stay idle for 80-90% of their time. We use only them comparatively a small time during the day, probably with obviously some clear exceptions. So it feels to me that the same parallel could be drawn in onto what's happening with my data that I'm sharing with the likes of Google or other hyperscalers online, where I never see the check, but I do get them through maybe using free services. So that's the parallel I can think of. But again, probably in the context of connected cars, we are at a very early stage. While I can see the value of that data, probably I cannot see a clear business model yet because of the lack of infrastructure and the missing parts around that model, which is yet to emerge. And it's actually very complex to develop because it may not just depend by the likes of the automakers, but other parts, the municipalities, and therefore, it's probably going to be idle for a while.
If I can add, I think from the Volvo car perspective, you want to manage the relationship very carefully, first of all, because the philosophy should be to empower the user with its data. That is the starting point. How then the user chooses, I mean, you have different layers then. In a connected car, you have, if you want, the layer where you have third-party partner that you partner with that may use that data, and they have their own relationship with the user. And then you may have, third party that may not have a relationship with the user of the car, but they may want to have access to that data. Now, this third party is what the Data Act is about, the third party access. It has to be said that, in my short time at Volvo, and I stress again, not a long time because there everybody has worked 20 years there. I've been in a month. The culture is very much, I've not heard anybody, there is no plan, there are no of to monetize the data of the user. No, in a million years. The key is a safe product. Then the data is an instrument to achieve a safer product. And then you monetize that. Also, I think, it's becoming kind of like, I think, the monetization, I don't know. So this is for me the starting point within Volvo cars. So, how does the user fit in all this? What is, because there's a danger there, I think we lose perspective that, the one that has to benefit as the user is we are real about, delivering to the spirit of all the rules that protect the user data. We need to give the user the first word and the power when it comes to his data. And just to add that, car makers already share for free a lot of data with public authorities. There is, for example, an initiative, Data for Safer Roads, which comes out of the European directive. Now I remember the number, but I think they've been sharing data about 8 kind of like type of incidents on the car that the users can access for free anytime, is this data, and that is given for free as a voluntary basis to public authorities precisely. So there is already sharing has been there from the beginning, but has been driven by, if you want, public goods, where there was specific initiative, sharing with accredited and trusted third parties, partners. So it's done in steps, but it's there already.
We haven't even got onto what happens when we go autonomous and who owns the data then. But we haven't got time, I'm afraid. So Serafino and Stefano, thank you so much for your insights. Shall I hand over to Dario to just wrap up the session?
We had more questions. Thanks first of all, thanks very much. We don't have a lot more time because the coffee is waiting. So if you're online, by the way, apologies, there's one more questions on cars when I'll ask them to answer on the chat. We seem to have hit a topic of high interest for connected cars. Later, we're going to have one more opportunity to address it with Mercedes. But as I said, we are running a bit late, so let's go and get a coffee, come back here in 5 minutes before we join in for the next two presentations. And if you're online, and I know some of you have been having some issues, you just need to refresh your browser if you've been watching for many hours, so just try to do that. And then we will be with you back in 5 minutes. Just wait for us.